Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Reardon, president of Connecticut Audubon Society, and welcome to this evening's program, uh, Bird Friendly Maple. Connecticut wishes to honor the indigenous communities native to the chapter area, including the Gusset, Wepawag, Quinnipiac, Tatahket, Mononketuk, and Hammonasset people. As we advocate for conservation of the land and its wildlife, we're indebted to the work of the native and indigenous people who cherished the land for thousands of years before European colonization. The next two community programs on Zoom will be on Tuesday, April 8th, protecting birds across their whole migratory paths, and on Wednesday, April 23rd, preventing bird window collisions at our homes. More information on the website. I'll also provide links for you in the email tomorrow. So Rosa Goldman is Forest Program Senior Associate with Audubon, Connecticut and New York, and is part of Audubon's Healthy Forest team. She works with private landowners, land trusts, and state and conservation partners to advance habitat management for forest birds across Connecticut, as well as in New York's Hudson Valley. She manages Audubon's bird-friendly maple program and um, forest and forest training and endorsement programs in Connecticut. She's a licensed forester in Connecticut and holds a Master of Forestry degree from the Yale School of the Environment. Uh, During the program, please keep yourself muted. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the program. And at this point, welcome, Rosa. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for having me. I'm gonna share a presentation real quick.
That looks familiar.
Yeah, I know you. This is one of your pictures I was just cycling through, wasn't it? Are you
Perfect.
all seeing the
Yeah, we're
presentation
seeing
screen
the
now? Okay,
presentation. Thanks.
perfect. Great. So yeah, like Dennis just said, my name is Rosa Goldman. I work with Audubon, Connecticut, New York, in our forest program. And my background is in forestry. So, I'm going to get into this in the presentation, but, we're working across Connecticut and New York to try and improve habitat for forest birds. And one of the ways that we're doing that is with bird-friendly maple. I'm arranging the screen a little bit better for myself. Oh, sorry, too fast. Okay, so just a brief overview of what I'm going to go over with you all today. I'll give a little bit of background on Audubon's healthy forest work, the forest bird population trends that really underlie the bird friendly maple program. And then we'll talk about, bird friendly maple, what the program is, what it's about, how it works, and what makes a sugarbush bird friendly, and how we recognize maple producers that are doing work to make their sugar bushes, more friendly to birds and better bird habitat. So Audubon's mission overall is to protect birds in the places they need today and tomorrow throughout the Americas using science, advocacy, education, and on-the-ground conservation. One of the ways that we do this is through the Wings Over Working Lands conservation strategy. So Audubon, Connecticut, New York is a regional office of the National Audubon Society. And our working lands conservation strategy looks, different in different parts of the country. Out in the West, in grasslands and rangelands, they have a conservation program where they, enroll ranch lands and are able to market bird-friendly beef in the conservation ranching. Out here, we are highly forested on the East Coast. As you can see from this map, and as you all are well aware, forests really dominate the eastern US. And so out here, our working land strategy takes the form of our healthy forest work, and we are really trying to protect and improve bird habitat on our forests and advocate for that at various arenas. And we're primarily at migratory birds. Most of these species that are using our forest habitat are migratory, not all of them. Some of them are here year round. Some of them are not breeding in our forest necessarily, but are using them as migratory stopover habitat on the way to breed farther north. And many of these species of birds that we are trying to improve habitat for have been in pretty significant population decline. You all may have seen these numbers in this graphic before, 3 billion birds lost since 1970. If we take it down a step further into just looking at eastern forest birds, we're looking at 17% population loss in eastern forest birds in that time. Wood thrush is a bird that I'll come back to a few times during this talk, and we talk about them a lot in relation to bird-friendly maple. And that is they've experienced a loss of 60% of their population. So, there's many factors, obviously, that can go into these population declines. But we know that loss of habitat quality and habitat quantity is really driving these population declines in these forest birds. And, thinking about losing habitat quantity is pretty clear. You can think of, a forest being converted to another land use, might be developed. You're losing habitat quantity, excuse me. But forest habitat quality can also be lost through a number of ways. One of those is forest fragmentation. When you, divide up a forest into smaller areas, you're not only decreasing the total amount of forest that you have, but you're also increasing the edge of the forest that you have around each of those patches that remain. And that leaves birds nesting in the forest interior much more vulnerable to things like predators, to nest parasitism from brown-headed cowbirds, which is what you're seeing in this photo here. We also, our forests are dealing with a lot of stressors that impact their health and resiliency, and also therefore impact the habitat quality that they're able to provide. One of those things is interfering vegetation. Commonly, that's invasive plants. Can sometimes be native plants that may act in an invasive way, such as beech sprouting or fern. And, invasive plants are really problematic, not only because they take over growing space from native plants and kind of take up that space and don't allow them to grow as much as we would like them to. But also, generally speaking, the fruits produced by invasive plants are not as nutritious for birds as native fruits. And invasive plants also, they just haven't co-evolved with our native insects, which are what birds really need to get the most nutrition during breeding and migration. So those invasive plants aren't providing, high quality food sources for birds the same way that native plants do. We have an overabundance of deer really across the state and across the region. And that, alongside invasive presence, excessive deer browse is really helping to contribute to this homogeneous forest structure that we see in a lot of our forests where, you have a canopy. You may not have a lot going on in the understory or the midstory, which I'll get into those layers of the forest in a bit. Sometimes this is also due to, a history of poor forest management or maybe a lack of forest management where we need it to help improve the health and structure of the forest. We're also seeing, so many forest pests threatening our forest health, such as, emerald ash borer. We have beech leaf disease, which is a new one. All kinds of things coming at us that we are kind of learning how to deal with as we go. And climate change, of course, is really exacerbating all of those threats, as well as changing weather patterns and really impacting forest health as well. So we're trying to do our best to manage within this context and, try to increase habitat quality in our forests, which a lot of times, really all the time, means we are also increasing forest health, we're increasing forest resiliency, and making, the forest better able to withstand changes from climate and all of these other stressors. So when we are talking about quality habitat for forest birds, really diversity is the key thing, both at the stand level and across the landscape, which I'll talk about briefly, but this is not a huge focus of bird-friendly maple. So I'm just going to touch on this briefly. But when we are assessing forest bird habitat, we do like to look at a landscape level where we're looking beyond just the forest stand or the property or the sugar bush that we're thinking about. We really need a range of forest ages on the landscape. You'll see here we have kind of a forest growing from left to right here, from initiation through a young forest and into a more mature, complex forest. And then going from left to right here, we have birds that will use the forest at these different ages. We've got woodcock, golden wing warbler, prairie warbler, black-throated blue warbler, wood thrush, and cerulean warblers. And these are just some examples of birds that will use these different successional stages of the forest. And, it's not super cut and dry either. For example, a wood thrush will nest in a mature forest, but then after fledging the nest needs to go and use a younger forest patch for foraging and seeking cover. So it's all kind of intertwined, and we want to see that balance of age classes across the landscape. But getting a little bit more into maple here. So these two maps kind of show on the left, we have forest bird species richness. And you can see we have the highest species richness in that red color, which is really concentrated in the Northeast and the upper Midwest. And then on the right, we have a map showing number of taps and kind of potential, like the percentage of sugar maple trees that are already tapped. And you can see we have the most of those, again, in the same areas. So there's a really significant overlap between where we find the highest species richness of forest birds and where people are tapping maple trees and where sugar maples are existing and being tapped. So bird-friendly maple is really it's one aspect of our work. We do our forest work in a few different ways, but bird-friendly maple really it began in Vermont, and it's really kind of a natural way to recognize, to work with maple producers who are already working their land. If you're keeping a sugar bush, which is the area of the forest where you're tapping trees for sap, if you are stewarding a sugar bush, that is an area of forest that you are maintaining as forest that you are already managing, you are familiar with. And so it's a really kind of natural partnership to work with those folks and help them manage not just for sap production and making maple products, but also for making that area of the forest a better quality habitat for the species of birds that we're trying to boost their populations. So bird-friendly maple, like I said, began in Vermont a while back. They have I think, over 100 participating producers in Vermont at this point. A few years ago, it expanded into New York, and then we've been active in Connecticut with this program for the past couple of years. And really, yeah, the goal is to promote sugarbush management that integrates bird habitat with sap production. And we also want to recognize maple producers for that work. We see this as a market-based conservation approach, where, we can all work together to help use this program to, communicate with people, communicate with, the customers that are buying these maple products and the general public, to increase public awareness of how bird conservation is related to maple production, how it's related to forestry and forest management overall. And so I kind of mentioned this already, but a sugar bush is really inherently good for birds because it does keep forest as forest. And that is the primary goal that we have. And on top of that, we do want to see there are ways that it can be higher quality habitat for birds. So there are differences between kind of a sugar bush that's managed for birds and maybe one that is not. And that's what I'll get into right now. So the few habitat kind of structures that we are looking for and when we are going out and assessing sugarbush habitat, the first one is vertical structural diversity. And really that refers to this kind of layering of vegetation within a forest. So you have multiple canopy layers all the way from the canopy up at the top to a nicely developed mid-story and an understory. When we are doing these assessments, we are looking at an understory as being from the ground up to about 6 feet high. And a mid-story is, from there to, 20, 25 feet, and then you have the canopy above that. So you want to see some vegetation present in all of those layers. And ideally, it's a diverse native vegetation. Sometimes you think about this as a green wall. You can see this picture here. Really looks like a green wall. You can't see very far into the forest, and that is ideal for habitat. And it's really highly beneficial to many forest breeding birds. We are trying to, with this program and with most of our forest work really, we are trying to manage for as many species of birds as possible. We're not focused on one in particular. We have a few species that we refer to as indicator species, and we talk about a lot because they, if you see them or you know that you have them and you have good habitat for them in your forest, then you know that you also have good habitat for a whole suite of other birds. But really, we're managing for a diversity of forest birds as many as we can. If you don't have ideal vertical structural diversity in your forest, sometimes some of the recommendations that we have are maybe to create some canopy gaps. Take out some trees to open up the canopy in areas that will allow some light to come down and boost regeneration on the forest floor. I'm going to get now into talking about just a few examples. Again, these are kind of indicator species that use different areas of the canopy. Hopefully you guys can hear that. We've got a scarlet tanager. And a scarlet tanager is our example, our indicator species for a species that nests in the upper canopy. They nest in the canopy of mature deciduous forests, 50 feet or higher ideally. And they forage for insects up there in the canopy from branches and trunks of trees and also straight from the air. So it's really important for them to have a nice diversity of big canopy trees that they can nest in and forage on. I was talking about insects before. Different species of insects are associated with different species of plants. So a nice diverse forest, diversity of canopy trees is going to give you a wider diversity of insects for foraging as well. And the scarlet tanager is kind of our poster bird for bird-friendly maple because they're on all of our on our logo, all of our labels and signs and things. So you see them a lot. Next, we have a wood thrush. I'm so excited to get to go in the woods and hear them again soon. But a wood thrush is our example of a mid-story nester. So they will nest in the mid-story of that mature forest with that's a forest that has nice large trees in it. And they will choose a spot that's about 10 to 15 feet off the ground. They like to find, a nice forked branch that they can build their nest in. But they do need, that developed mid-story to find a nice place where they can build a safe and secure nest. And they also will forage for invertebrates in the leaf litter. So that's another thing that we look for in terms of habitat quality is a nice developed layer of leaf litter for birds like the wood thrush to forage in, also for a bird like the ovenbird, for example, to use to build their nests. But wood thrush will also eat soft mast or fruits from understory and midstory plants. So if we are lacking in midstory, like I mentioned before, we can create some canopy gaps. We can also do some thinning in the forest where we just take out some trees throughout the stand, again, to kind of reallocate growing space to the remaining trees and also let a little bit more light on to help develop whatever regeneration we have. And like I mentioned before, wood thrush are one of the species that has experienced the most significant population decline. Next, we have a black-throated blue warbler. and they nest in the understory, generally within 5 feet of the ground. So, there's birds nesting all the way from the canopy all the way down to the ground. And so black-throated blue warblers really need that dense understory, again, creating some gaps in the canopy if we need to help promote the understory, to try and get, the structure that they need to build their nests. This is an example of an area of a sugar bush that is not ideal bird habitat. Just kind of focusing on the foreground here, because in the background we can see a little bit more structure in the understory and the midstory. It's hard to tell what those plants are exactly, if they're invasives or native. But in the foreground here, we have an area that we have some canopy trees for sure. From what I can tell at the scale of this picture, they look mostly sugar maple. So we're not getting that canopy tree diversity. And we also, have an area that's dominated by hay-scented fern, which is a native species, but it can act kind of invasive in these instances where it really takes over an area and prevents anything else from establishing. So as a result, we're not seeing a developed understory and midstory in this area. In this picture, you can see really clearly we have that green wall effect. We have our canopy trees, and then we have a really well-developed midstory and understory. There's lots of places here for birds looking to nest at all different heights and layers of the canopy. So species diversity, like I just mentioned, is our next habitat characteristic that we look for in a sugar bush. And our guideline for this is that we want at least 25% of the canopy trees to be something other than sugar maple. And the way that we measure this is by basal area, which is a forestry measurement where you're basically measuring the area of a tree trunk if you were to look straight down on it and look at the area that the tree is taking up on the ground, basically. So we want no more than 25%, no more than 75%, excuse me, of the sugar bush to be sugar maple. We recognize that a sugar bush is naturally going to be on a site that favors sugar maple. Producers are going to want to have maybe it to be mostly sugar maple so they can get a good sap volume out of there. But we do want to see a diversity of other species. And there is research showing that both total bird abundance and bird species diversity, those both decrease when the basal area of maple increases beyond that percentage in relation to the stand as a whole. So that's our guideline for producers. And we want to manage for a diversity of tree species. We want to control that interfering vegetation where we can, in order to allow for that to happen. And ensure that birds have a wide variety of available food sources. Insects that are associated with different species of trees and shrubs. Mast, which is, soft mast refers to berries and fruits, and hard mast refers to nuts like acorns or hickory nuts. So we want ideally a variety of all of those things in the forest for nutrition. And also to provide for any particular habitat associations that birds might have with specific species of plants. Downed woody material is another important habitat characteristic that we're looking for. We want to see both coarse and fine woody material. Now, coarse means logs, and what we're looking for, what we're counting when we're out in the field, is logs that are at least 3 feet long and 10 inches in diameter. Really the more the merrier. We want to see as much downed wood as possible. They are, provide important places for birds to seek cover, to perch, to nest right against the log sometimes, to forage in the decaying wood. And larger down logs, when they get to be, 18 inches in diameter or bigger, they are important for a species like the ruffed grouse, which we use them for drumming. And so we always ask that folks leave any logs that they can in the woods and treetops and things if they're doing any active management. Leaving treetops and other slash or logs can also prevent deer browse a little bit, try to deter the deer from going into an area that has a lot of kind of messy treetops and things in it. So it can be a benefit to forest regeneration too. Standing dead trees or snags are a really important habitat feature, as well as living trees that have cavities in them. They're really important sites for nesting and foraging and roosting for many species of wildlife, not just birds, but many species of birds. And if there are not any or not enough snags or cavity trees in a sugar bush, we might recommend creating some, or which you can do by girdling, or just by kind of setting aside, retaining some small trees that can be left to become snags later on. And we, ideally want to see larger cavity trees that are at least 10 inches in diameter. A sugar bush is inherently predominantly a hardwood stand. It's going to be growing on a site that favors sugar maple, and it's going to be mostly hardwood. So within that context, any softwood trees that we have are really important habitat feature. There are species of forest birds that will specifically seek out and specifically need softwoods to nest, such as black-throated green warblers and hermit thrush. They will, seek out softwoods, such as hemlock or pine. And so anywhere that we have softwoods in the sugar bush, even if it's just a couple trees, we always recommend keeping them. They can have really high habitat value. They keep their needles year round, obviously, so they have that thermal cover in the winter for species that are here during the winter. Really, really important to have it within a hardwood forest if we see them. So the Bird Friendly Maple recognition process, it is a recognition program. At this point, we don't have a certification. So when we enroll a maple producer in the program, we refer to that as a recognition. This is our logo in the center there with the scarlet tanager on it. Our first requirement for enrolling a new producer in the program is that their sugar bush needs to be located within a forest block that is at least 200 acres. Now, there's no minimum size requirement at all for the sugar bush. It can be as small as it is. And they don't have to own or manage that 200-acre block. We just want to see that the sugar bush is located within that. And that's because some of the more area sensitive species, wood thrush is one of them, they really need a forest block of that size in order to have the best breeding success. And, that's kind of the whole goal of this program. So we want to start from a place where we know that they have what they need to be successful. So we do, we check, do some mapping and confirm that the sugar bush is located within that forest block. And then we'll go out and do a habitat assessment and a sugar bush inventory. And we're looking for everything I just went over, all of those habitat characteristics. And a producer does not have to meet every single guideline in order to enroll. For example, they don't have to have the exact understory and midstory structure that we're looking for. They don't have to have the exact percentage of tree species diversity. But by enrolling in the program and being recognized, they are committing to managing towards those conditions. So we are recognizing them for that work and for incorporating our recommendations into their management. So following a visit, we'll put together a report and some recommendations for them and distribute these marketing materials with the logo that you see here. We have product labels for syrup bottles and things like that. We have signs, etc. And that's all, to go towards that goal of trying to use this program to help communicate, the value of this work as well. And it's a 5-year recognition period. So after 5 years, we'll go back and reassess conditions and how things are going. This is a map showing our current participating producers in Connecticut. We have 10 sugar bushes enrolled, currently 111 acres. And we've got a few more in the pipeline. So there's going to be some new additions to this map very soon, I hope. But this is really exciting after just a couple of years of getting this program going in the state to have all of these participants managing their sugar bushes for birds. And then looking ahead for this program, we did receive an IRA grant to support this program and expand it further in the Northeast. It's already actually begun in a little bit in Maine, and is expanding to Pennsylvania as well, addition to Minnesota and Wisconsin. We are going to be exploring third-party certification, whether that's something that is a good fit for this program, and also doing some research to better understand the impact and that this program is having both on producers and consumers of maple products. And we're also continuing to enroll sugar bushes in Connecticut. So I don't know if anyone on here today is a maple producer, or maybe knows someone who is. Let me know if you're interested. I am really happy to connect with anyone who wants to talk more about how to be a part of this. And that is all I have for you. So I'm happy to, let me see, I'll stop sharing this, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thanks, thanks, Rosa. We do have some questions. Mike, you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I was wondering about the deer populations in Connecticut because I've heard from folks that are hunting that said that the deer population is declined, but when you take a hike through the forest in Connecticut, there's almost no understory in some areas. And my second question was answered because I was wondering if there were any specific labels that could go on products, on syrup once you were part of the program.
Great. Yeah, that's interesting to hear what you've heard from hunters about the deer, because yeah, just looking at the forest and hearing what I've heard from, folks who do deer like population surveys and things, we do have an overabundance of deer, not just in Connecticut, but across much more broad area than that. And it ranges a bit geographically. Some areas are a little more harder hit. But yeah, it's a huge obstacle to regeneration in the forest. As you mentioned, you can clearly see when you walk through if everything on the understory has been nibbled and isn't able to grow. That's a huge problem. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Anita, you want to ask your question? All right. Anita's question was about Native Americans using maple syrup. Did they always do that?
Yeah, I mean, people have been getting syrup from, getting sugar and sap and syrup from maple trees for as long as they've been in the same geographic location. And animals know about it too. There's a long history of people sugaring. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. Amy,
Yeah, I just want to ask, I lost a lot of my maples last couple of years. Most of them fell down or rotted and had to be cut down. And two arborists told me that's because we had extensive drought and the roots dried out. And they said we're really at the very bottom range of the maples. I live near well, a couple miles from the coast, but I guess I'm a zone 7, a full 7 where I am. And they said it's really just too warm for the sugar maples where I am. I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
I mean, it's true. We have had, pretty significant periods of droughts recently, which has really stressed, maples and other trees, as you said. And, we're not at the very bottom of the range, but we're not near the top of the range either. They do extend farther south than us. And that's why, if you look at some climate projections, people are projecting that sugar maple may not fare as well here in the future. Um, red maple is projected to do a little bit better. But yeah, hopefully we can break out of our cycle of droughts, so they can all have a bit better go of it. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear you lost those trees. It's never very fun.
Lauren with laryngitis has this question. I would think that syrup producers would want to maximize the coverage of sugar maple and not have other species. So are the owners receptive to this?
Yeah, sometimes you will find, and usually this is in more, large scale commercial sugar bushes, industrial sugar bushes, where you might find what you're describing, Lauren, where it's basically everything that's not a sugar maple has maybe been cut out. But with the folks that I've been working with, and the folks that Audubon is working with in this program, in other states as well, people are really interested in managing their forests, not just for maximizing their sap production, but for the health of the forest as a whole. And if you may be familiar, like, more with agriculture, the concept of having a monoculture crop is not necessarily the healthiest, or can be a bit risky. If something comes through and threatens that one crop, then you're kind of out of luck. The same is true in the forest. If you have a forest that is only one species, it's much more at risk for disease, pests. There is an insect called the forest tent caterpillar, for example, which really likes sugar maple. If you have a stand that's entirely sugar maple, you're really much more at risk to being impacted by that insect. Versus if you have a more diverse stand, a more diverse forest is really just more resilient and healthy in the face of all of these challenges on the whole. And yeah, everyone that is participating in bird-friendly maple in Connecticut, and the ones that I've worked with in New York as well, because I work in Hudson Valley in New York too, they've all come to us. I haven't really had to do a lot of asking people if they want to participate. People are hear about this program and they're really interested in participating because they see the value in managing for birds, managing for, ecological health of the forest. And so yeah, it's been really great in that regard.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? If you do, unmute yourself and ask away. And while we're waiting for that, the minimum size of the forest block was what?
200 acres. Yeah.
And it's not required that the sugar bush owner have that 200 acres.
No, they just need to be
They
within
need to be,
Yeah, they don't have to.
they need to be adjacent to it.
Yeah,
So,
adjacent, or wherever they're positioned within it. They just need to be in that 200 acres.
so
Yeah.
if it were a land trust or a state forest or some forest area that was not going to be cut and developed.
Ideally, that's ideal, right? Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's true, if the 200-acre forest block is just made up of some privately owned properties, you may not know what's going to happen to them. But we don't look at that necessarily in determining whether the forest block is what we're looking for. We are looking purely at acreage. Obviously, things can happen, ownership can change. But, yes, if it's under, land trust or state or other ownership where it's not going to be changing and developed from forest, that's obviously ideal. Yeah. And we've worked with, land trusts and state forests that have sugar bushes. So that's a great opportunity too.
Mike, come on back. Michael Russo?
Oh, I think he's saying we can just ask. So you're asking about buckets. So you're asking about, like, the challenge of working in the forest with understory and midstory present. It sounds like whether you're working with buckets or having to go out and maintain tubing Yeah, people want to be able to move around the woods, and the same is true when we're talking about downed logs on the ground, or having snags, standing dead trees in the forest that might fall on your sap lines. I have found people are way more receptive to those things than I ever thought. Especially having snags in the forest, I really thought that maple producers would be wary of the potential of a snag to fall and damage their sap lines. Um, but actually, I found really the opposite. Like people are leaving all of the snags. I've multiple maple producers have told me, if it falls on the sap lines, like that's okay. It's worth having it here for the value that it provides to wildlife. So people are like really, really into this. And with the what you're specifically asking about with the understory and midstory, um, what we are looking for, our specific guidelines for bird-friendly maple are that averaged across the sugar bush, we want both of those to be at least 25% cover. So we're not looking for like full understory and midstory everywhere. That's not really realistic, especially in a working forest that you have to move through. But we are looking for at least 25% cover of each of those layers. And you can manage that, by thinning or creating some canopy gaps are generally what we recommend within a sugar bush. But yeah, people are generally very receptive. And for a lot of people that are using tubing rather than buckets, you don't have to really um, be traveling the whole sugar bush all the time, except when you're laying out your lines or maybe if something needs to be repaired. But you don't need to be able to move through it all the time. So I think that works in our favor too. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? Rosa, thank you so much. Um, Great introduction to bird-friendly maple. And everybody, check out the website for the next programs, and they'll be in the email tomorrow as well. Um, Thanks a lot for joining us, and stay safe, everyone.